Hello, and welcome to Immigration Talk, a space where we hear from an expert on matters related to the immigration industry, law and policy, and practice. I'm Rosalie Venstall-Dynan, and joining me is immigration lawyer Joel Sandaluk. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Joel, what strategies do you use in order to cultivate relationships with immigration officials?
There's a number of things that we do in order to cultivate and maintain relationships with immigration officials. It's important to remember why these relationships are so important. One of the first reasons is you're going to be dealing with really just one government department and a couple of agencies for the entire time that you're practicing immigration and refugee law. And one of the realities of the federal public service is that people tend to have long careers. They start relatively early and they don't finish for many years, sometimes decades later. And what that means is that you're going to continue to encounter the same people over and over again. And for that reason, it's critical to have a positive, meaningful relationship with those people. Not in a way that's cynical, but simply because it will make your life and their lives far, far easier. And that has to be a relationship built on openness and honesty and mutual respect. But more than just sort of general platitudes of the importance of building decent working relationships with people, it's important also to remember that within the federal public service, people's roles are very tightly circumscribed. And what that means is individuals who are perhaps a little bit more proactive than some of their colleagues have the ability to provide you with a great wealth of information and a great deal of insight into matters and processes and policies than you might otherwise be able to get simply by doing the research on your own. One of the ways that I often characterize this is to think of yourself as an office worker in a cubicle, and everything you need to do your job is within that cubicle. You never need to go outside of it. You never need to look outside of it. And that might be fine for most people. But certain office workers will have the willingness to essentially peek their eyes over top of the borders of their cubicle and see what's going on around them. And your ability as a representative to identify those officers who are able to be a little bit more proactive, a little bit more insightful, is critical. Not only because those people can give you a great deal of information and insight about your cases and about the processes involved, but also those are the types of people, generally speaking, who will remain within that organization and will be promoted within that organization, and who will be able to be a much more meaningful contact for you as your career and their careers progress. But more than just building that decent working relationship by being, ironically, simply a decent, reasonable, and open person with them, and always being honest with them, it's also important to maintain those relationships. And when I say maintain those relationships, what I really primarily mean is record those relationships. Keep notes of the files that you work with particular officers. Make notes of the experiences you've had with particular officers. And what you'll find is that you return to those notes and return to those officers with questions, with inquiries, or with other matters on other cases in the future. It's always important, though, to deal with those people reasonably and decently. And it's also very important to bear in mind the ethical considerations that often come into play when you're talking about maintaining a relationship with a member of a public service. There's a few things to bear in mind. The first thing is to never, ever ask an officer anything that might conceivably make them uncomfortable to offer. The reason for that is because as soon as you ask something of an officer that he feels unable or uncomfortable in providing, that essentially poisons the relationship and brings it to an end. So when you're interacting with officers, be very cautious about what you're requesting of them. Be very sure that you would only ask something that you personally would feel okay providing yourself. It's very, very important for these relationships never, ever to feel transactional, only collegial. And that's critically important. Also, however, it's important to never trade on your relationships with officials from, whether it's the IRB, the courts, CBSA, to never ever do that. And I have never, no one in my firm has ever sat down with a client and explained that because of my special relationship with somebody from a government agency, they can obtain something through me that they may not be able to obtain through another representative. That's a breach of the code of conduct. It's unethical, and it's something that I'm always very cautious to guard against. And it's sometimes very difficult because many clients will approach me with this assumption, or they'll ask me this, and I'm very careful to disabuse people of that assumption as soon as we start talking about any relationship or any connection I might have with a public servant. However, if you're able to develop these relationships, to build upon them, and to maintain them, they can become incredibly invaluable to you in the course of your practice. They can save you potentially hours and hours of time and energy, and they can provide real value to your clients, not in terms of a favor that might be offered, but rather insight that might be obtained or just basic information on files, none of which is unethical to obtain, but all of which is critical to the way that you proceed and the way that you represent your clients.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Joel, for taking the time to share with us some of those valuable strategies on how to cultivate positive and healthy relationships with immigration officials. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let's talk again.